So I want to talk about Germany today and what's happening to the alternative for Germany, the AfD, because I really do think this has some pretty big implications and consequences for democracy across the West. Now, you might remember that AfD stormed into second place at the recent federal election in February, and ever since then has actually been topping some of the national polls in Germany because of its opposition to mass uncontrolled immigration, to broken borders, to radical Islamism. Now, the AfD is also part of a wider trend of rising support for populism across Europe and the West, which I've talked about on this channel many times before. But now, remarkably, astonishingly, in early May 2025, the German state is moving against the AfD, essentially clamping down on the party and setting the stage for it to be banned. What am I talking about? Well, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution in Germany has just declared, conveniently after the federal election, that the AfD is an extremist organization. That's right. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because that now sets the stage for the German state to be able to infiltrate the AfD, to send security services people into the party, to basically hijack the party from within. It also means that if you're in the public sector and you're a member of the AfD, you could quite easily be sacked. So this is going to have a lot of implications. And what's remarkable is that the report that concluded that AfD is an extremist organization has not been made public. Little bits have been leaked to mainly left-wing media, but the report itself has not been made public. So here we are, Democracy 101 in Germany. Wasn't this what J.D. Vance was talking about in his Munich speech, where he suggested that free speech and free expression are dying across large parts of Europe, which of course led to members of the German elite to burst into tears, spontaneously unable to handle this criticism. Well, here we are. Now, I just want to read you a couple of things from what we have got in that report, just to kind of show you what we're talking about here, because you might be thinking that actually we're talking about German politicians saying, terrible things about what's happening in the world. But I'm going to read you some of the quotes that have been leaked from the report. Apparently, one AfD politician said this: "There's more to being German than simply holding a citizenship certificate." Very extreme. I mean, after all, didn't a British court strip the ISIS terrorist Shamima Begum from citizenship because they concluded that she was a profound threat to our way of life? So mainstream institutions also sharing that view. Or how about the AfD politician who said multiculturalism means the loss of tradition, loss of identity, loss of homeland, murder, manslaughter, robbery, and gang rape? Well, it's pretty punchy stuff, but is it really extremist given the empirical fact that in Germany in 2023 alone, get this, there were 761 gang rapes in the country recorded in Germany, and almost half of all of those suspects were foreigners, were coming from outside of Germany. Another politician said that bad immigration policies have led to a 100,000-fold import of people from backward and misogynistic cultures. Well, again, punchy stuff, but like the men who sexually assaulted more than 1,000 women in Cologne during the New Year celebrations in 2016, most of whom were identified as Arab, and some of whom had only arrived recently in the country as asylum seekers. I mean, the key point that I'm making is that this isn't really about identifying extremism. This is about trying to block, shut down, discredit, and stigmatize organized political opposition to the elite class in Western democracies that has been imposing its political project on everybody else. That essentially is what this is about. But look too at the federal office itself that has been issuing this report, because I just want to tell you who's behind all of this. The US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has gone on X and described the clampdown of the AfD as tyranny in disguise. That's what he said. Now, in response to that, the German Foreign Office itself replied to Rubio on X and said this was the result of a thorough and independent investigation. An independent investigation. But the federal office that's overseeing this clampdown on the AfD is not an independent office at all. It is bound to the Interior Ministry, and the Interior Ministry is run by somebody called Nancy Faeser of the Social Democratic Party, the SPD. The same person who made sure recently that a right-wing journalist got a 7-month suspended prison sentence for posting an edited picture of her with a sign that read, "I hate freedom of speech." Because nothing says, "I love freedom of speech," quite like putting journalists in prison. The report itself, furthermore, was drafted when the federal office was led by a man called Thomas Holdenwang, who left it only in November of last year so he could stand as a candidate for the mainstream CDU, the Christian Democratic Union. In other words, people from the two main parties that feel threatened by the AfD are now involved in a federal office that's concluding that AfD is an extremist organization. I mean, seriously, this is not a politically neutral body. And remember, the CDU and the SPD have since tried to form a coalition government, and the main opposition to that is the AfD. But if you don't believe me, just listen to this. This is something that was said by Hans-Jörg Maaßen, former president of the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution. This is a guy who actually led the office before the office that's now trying to clamp down on the AfD. This is a man who actually led that federal office. Well, he just took to X and he said this: "The Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution is not an independent institution, but an agency subordinate to the federal government. Anyone who claims otherwise," he said, "is lying. As head of the Office for the Protection of the Constitution, I've always advocated that it not be misused by the government to combat political opponents." Isn't that interesting? This is the guy that actually ran that organization. Furthermore, I think he goes on, "The current federal government, under the left-wing radical Minister Faeser, has misused the Domestic Intelligence Agency as an instrument to persecute political opponents of the government." Again, how would he know? Well, he ran this office for many years, so this is clearly no longer an independent body. And you have to ask yourself another question, which I think is really important. Why, if the federal office in the German state was neutral and was interested in countering extremism, then why haven't they gone after left-wing extremists with the same vigor that they've gone after so-called right-wing extremists? And I've got one example which I wrote about this week that I just want to read you because I think it's absolutely critically important. Apart from the AfD, the other winner of the last German election, of course, was Die Linke, or the left. And they are the direct descendants of the Socialist Unity Party of Germany, which ran the communist dictatorship in Eastern Germany. Now, in the election in February, somebody called Gregor Gysi, one of their senior members, appeared in a campaign video wearing a balaclava with the number 161 on it. Those numbers correspond in the alphabet to AFA, otherwise known as a gesture to anti-fascist action, or what you and I would call Antifa, a violent, left-wing, terroristic, extremist organization. Well, what happened to that man, you might think? Was a report written into his political involvement and leanings? No, he was given the honor of delivering the inaugural speech of the parliament after the federal election in February. Seriously, unbelievable, isn't it? So make no mistake, what we're seeing here are two very different approaches to two ends of the political spectrum. And this isn't just about Germany and the AfD. We just saw Marine Le Pen being blocked to stand for the French presidential election in 2027. Again, a misuse of funds was used, misuse of finance, even though I would suggest lots of people in the European Parliament have been misusing funds recently. We've seen the crackdown on political opposition in Romania. Again, somebody who took a very tough line on the European Union. We saw similar attempts after the Brexit referendum in 2016 to shut down political opposition to the European Union. The elite class worked overtime to do whatever they could to stop this alternative viewpoint from gaining traction. They tried to overturn Brexit, including Keir Starmer himself, who campaigned for a second referendum at which basically the British people would be told to vote again. Everywhere you look, basically across Europe, you see the elite class not actually addressing the reasons why people are voting for these parties, but doing everything they can through lawfare, using the courts, using lawyers, using legal judicial instruments to try and shut down organised opposition to the elite class and their failing policies. And this is what they do, because they don't have any other response to rising public support for anti-establishment insurgents. I think what's going on in Germany is completely transparent. I think it's absolutely outrageous. Will there be individual loons and radicals within the AfD? Of course there will. Much like there are loons and radicals in every single political party, from the anti-Semites and the Islamist sympathizers within the Labour Party through to the eco-extremists in Green parties. Let's just be frank. Every party has individual loons and radicals. But should the state be politicized to this degree that it is actively trying to shut down the first or second most popular party in a nation state simply because that party is opposing policies like mass uncontrolled immigration, broken borders, radical Islamism and multiculturalism? Of course not. What we're seeing is the growing rise of post-democracy, where power, accountability, authority are taken away from the people where they belong and put in the hands of unelected, unaccountable lawyers, judges, and courts who increasingly decide what is and what is not democracy. Now, that is not a kind of society that I want to live in. I don't think it's the kind of society you want to live in. It's certainly not one that the forgotten majority wants to live in. So this, again, is pointing to the death of democracy, not because of the rise of populism, but because of the authoritarian overreach of the liberal, dogmatic elite class. In fact, not liberal, illiberal, dogmatic, authoritarian elite class, which likes to think of itself as being the enlightened ones, which likes to think of itself as being the democratic ones, which likes to think of itself as being the liberal ones. But in reality, as many of us have known for quite a long time, it is anything but. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, hit the bell, you get notifications. Join us at mattgoodwin.org. 80,000 readers getting our essays, almost all of it's for free, straight to your email. You can talk about politics from a countercultural perspective. Bye-bye.
Germany's domestic intelligence agency has classified the far-right AfD party as an extremist entity.